Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the ARES Strategic Mining Investor Update. Throughout today's recorded meeting, investors will be in listen-only mode. Questions are encouraged and can be submitted at any time just using the Q&A tab situated on the right-hand corner of your screen. Simply type in your questions at any time and press send. Given the significant attendance on today's call, the company will not be able to answer every question it receives during the meeting itself. However, the company can review all questions submitted today and will publish their responses where it's appropriate to do so. Before we begin, we'd like to submit the following poll. I'm sure the company will be most grateful for your participation. I'd now like to hand over to James Walker, CEO. Good afternoon.
Afternoon, everyone. Thanks for jumping on. So I think the format of today is to just run you quickly through the project and recent developments and then move on to the questions. But hopefully you can all see the presentation in front of you at the moment. I don't know if you can see me. If you can, my apologies. But yeah, I imagine a lot of you will already be familiar with the project. A lot of you are investors already. But we'll still just give a bit of an overview. Hopefully there'll be something in there that's interesting for everybody. So just to give a little bit of background about who we are, ARES Strategic Mining, and we do have the only permitted fluorspar mine in the US. This was a big industry in the 90s in the US, and it was responsible for supplying to US industry, but a lot of that did get shipped overseas. And so what's ended up happening now is that there's a lot more focus on domestic produce and returning of and reindustrialization of the US. And obviously, we're part of that too. Fluorspar is a bit of a unique mineral. I think it's a critical mineral, which means it's vital to the economic security of the United States. I think it's the only non-metallic critical mineral that is 100% imported into the US as well. So it's quite unique in that fashion, which is why it's garnering a lot of attention. And I'm sure a lot of people wouldn't have heard of fluorspar before, because when you ship an industry overseas, you don't really get to hear about it. But now that it's making a bit of a comeback, I'm sure we'll be the first of several people that are really going to be pursuing this. China was obviously a very big producer of fluorspar, and that was one of the reasons why the industry was shipped overseas. But even they have gone from being a net exporter to a net importer. And so, and that's principally because they mined out a lot of their high-grade fluorspar during their industrialization period. And that sort of left them in a situation now where they've just got low-level deposits, far under the grade that we've got at the Spore Mountain, and that ARES will be mining very shortly. So just to give a bit more about the project itself, there's a whole district scale operation that we have at the Spore Mountain. Covers about 6,000 acres. We've done drilling there, metallurgical work, assaying, LiDAR, geophysics. We've done obviously a lot of work to get the property to where it is today, which is things like ramp installations, heavy mining equipment coming in, ventilation systems going in, all the big stuff that leads up to mining, and including plant purchasing and all that sort of stuff. So we've been very well supported, and we've tried to take the tactic of really trying to avoid, I think, some of the traps that befall junior mining companies, which is really you start with a low valuation, which also means a low share price, and if you raise any amount of money, it can be incredibly dilutive. And if you do want to be one of the few junior miners that takes the operation all the way up to production, I mean, typically you would dilute yourself into oblivion. And so we've sought government funding to try and avoid that as much as we possibly can. And in that, we've been very successful. So things like the USDA has come in for low interest funding, and we use that to purchase things like the lumps plant, and do construction work at the site and buy in big industrial land. Then we got $10.5 million bond from the state of Utah for the promotion of manufacturing within the state. That allowed us to do things like buy the flotation plant and continue the construction at the Delta site. And then most recently, we got an $11 million grant from the state of Utah and the CIB there. And a lot of that was also related to the fact that we found very good grades of gallium actually in our fluorspar at a time when there's sort of an economic war going on with China, and China cut off gallium supply to the US to try and inhibit the US tech industry from really competing in the long term, because obviously that is an inherently important mineral in the creation of microchips for computers. So the fact that we got that got us a lot of attention, and the fact that we already had a critical mineral plus the gallium, it led to an enormous amount of support from the state of Utah. So and that's been complemented as well by having institutional investment from people like Sorby and other players in the space too. But the good part is now that because we've done most of the work and we're now sitting very comfortably within the cash position, the project itself has been very streamlined by all this government investment. And the nice thing for all of us as well is that it's avoided having to do any of that by buying in shares and or using shares and equity to raise that financing, just so we can protect our positions in the long run, which is I think what we all really want out of this. Is we always want to see a good return, and we don't really want to undermine that prospect. So I've spoken a little bit about the fluorspar and gallium already, but just to touch a little bit more on those. I mean, the fluorspar in the US is incredibly important industry. I mean, it's used in the manufacture of aluminum, steel, hydrofluoric acid, fluorine, refrigeration units, microchips, electronics, glass, cement. It's basically used in everything. And prior to, say, the 90s, when the industry got shipped overseas, it would have been something that everyone was relatively familiar with, because it was a big industry and it was necessary in all of these different areas. It can't be recycled, and there are no substitutes for it either. And the fact that the US actually has a really thriving, steel industry that requires so much fluorspar, because there are 20 for every ton of steel produced, you need 20 pounds of fluorspar. You can get an idea of just how important this is as a mineral. And the fact that we've had to be importing all of this really has, I think, highlighted, especially in recent administrations. I'm talking about Trump's, and actually the recent Biden administration has been very concentrated on trying to build back a national resilience to imports around strategic and critical minerals, because that dependence leads to an inability to exercise international policy. You need to make exceptions for things, and we even see that with the Ukrainian war, where the US makes exceptions for buying in uranium because it can't manufacture its own highly enriched uranium for its own defense purposes. And on the gallium side of things, that's become critically important as well. And just a quick background about that is that we had detected some gallium in our fluorspar with SGS assaying testing. But it was really when we began working with the Ames National Laboratory, who reached out to us because they had a mandate to investigate gallium because of the economic war with China, and found that actually in their report, there were very sizable concentrations, much more than we expected, within our fluorspar ore. And so now we're actually got a partnership with them to look at how we adapt our flotation plant to siphon off a gallium concentrate that we could then sell independently. So the nice part here is that sort of landed in our lap, and we didn't really have to do anything to work to that, but now we're going to have to do some work to look at how we do the metallurgy around recovering that. And once we do that, gallium sells for an enormous amount more than fluorspar. We wouldn't recover nearly as much, of course, but it would be, not pure profit exactly, but it would be a major boost to our top and bottom lines as we build this project out. And so, yeah, that's something to watch out for. Again, gallium, very important in the tech industry. That's half the reason why, 100% of the reason why China cut off the supply to the US, just to try and cripple them. So the good part here is that if you've been following the story, last year we did a huge amount of work on the site, and that meant ramp installations, adits, ventilation installations, rock bolting, cementing, purchase of mining equipment. All of this kind of stuff was sort of done last year. And when we closed this recent 11 million from the state, we got everyone back to work straight away. We kept a sort of a care and maintenance, and then we ramped it up completely. And so all the mining guys are back on site. So I'd be watching out for some future releases, public releases, of just about the progress that's underway there at the site. So we bought in a few more pieces of equipment in the last month. We've obviously starting now to go through the ore body. So the ramp was already at ore body level. Now we're drifting through, which means actually we would very imminently be able to start stockpiling big ore bodies of fluorspar at surface, ready for starting to truck into Delta for when the lumps plant is ready. So we've got the haulage companies ready. We've got the mining equipment done. We've got the ramp installations done. The mining teams are on site. So, you know, it's a very nice, comfortable position. Like one of the few nice positions I think junior miners are actually in recently, because it's a very difficult industry to take a project that's greenfield and progress it all this way. But infrastructure's there, equipment's there, plant infrastructure's there, and importantly, customers in the market are just waiting for this. So I would say on the Delta site front, you'll probably see some pictures coming out imminently of the assembled parts coming together a lot more just to form that overall plant. We'll probably pour a bit more concrete. And the idea here is we'll bring that lumps plant online later this year first, but we'll start obviously on the flotation plant construction, and that'll be completed early next year. But the idea here is to get into production, get revenue generating this year, and then that second plant can come online, and that'll boost our capacity and boost our product line, because we'll be able to produce both met spar and acid spar. So I jumped ahead a little bit there, but the processing facility is a very important component of this. You probably remember from last year seeing concrete being poured and foundations being laid, and then steel structures being erected. And so that obviously that is now being complemented by the fact that construction crews are back on that site. And so a lot of that work where we had assembled a lot of the plant components, now we're taking those into the proper places and we're putting those in place. Now we'll look next to begin pouring concrete foundations for the flotation plant separately. And then we'll have a concurrent construction project where we're building out both plants at the same time. But that lumps plant will come online a lot faster. We've had it on site for a bit longer, so we've been able to assemble it and get it all ready. And then it should hopefully be like a bit like a Lego set. And we can just sort of like move all the pieces into place. And then the nice part is that any material that can't be turned into final product for steel industry, metal industry, whoever wants the metallurgical grade, we can stockpile that equipment, that stuff, and have it ready for when the flotation plant is operational. And then we'll just feed it into that system, and then we'll have that acid spar. And the nice thing about acid spar is that you can basically feed anything into that system. Now, obviously, the higher grade, the better. But if you can feed low grade in, you can still concentrate it to get towards that high quality product. Whereas for metallurgical grade, it's best to begin with some higher grade products. So you can get toward that 80 to 90% premium metallurgical grade product, which we'll be producing at the later this year. So as I said, like we're in a very nice position at the moment. I mean, there's some in front of you at the moment. You've seen some of the costs of met spar and acid spar. Fortunately, the lower end of those ranges is kind of unlikely at the moment. We're not seeing that very much because, as I said, there's a big squeeze on this stuff. China going from a net exporter to a net importer, and there's not many countries that actually produce fluorspar. There's countries like Vietnam and South Africa, China, but even everything in Asia, even if it's Mongolia, it gets eaten up by the Chinese market. And so the constraint now is trying to find good fluorspar projects that can be brought online. But because of that, there's a squeeze on the price that has pushed it up that's put us in a very advantageous position for when we do start producing. And the nice part is that there's obviously big interest in our product because it will be a US derived product. And there have been complications in the past with trying to source it internationally. Intermittent supply, high arsenic contents, impurities. Thankfully, a lot of these detriments we don't fall foul of. So we should be in a very strong position. And we also have of course, the advantage of shipping domestically is obviously much easier than taking international shipments in from Asia or Europe or South Africa or where it is. And there's no shortage, thankfully, of customers here. Like, obviously, we put out announcements about our German partners, but there's been a number of people that are reaching out to us recently, especially as we're ramping up. Very eager to get hold of this. So we could produce all day. We could double or triple production, and really we would have no end to, or no inability to sell this stuff. In fact, it's because it's on the screen at the moment as well. Like, the fact that we have this has been of major interest to the Department of Energy, and last year they put out an award for building back the US's ability to be able to enrich uranium up to reactor levels. But the process actually involves a product called uranium hexafluoride, and the DOE's mandate was that everything should try and be as domestically sourced as possible. And that put us in line to be part of the DOE contract to supply the fluorspar necessary to create the uranium hexafluoride to do enrichment for the uranium industry. And the nuclear energy industry is looking to power big data centers, big AI. So their order book is becoming enormous, which means a huge amount of uranium hexafluoride needs to be created. And obviously, we're standing in a very strong position to be able to supply that massive demand that's looming. Talking about gigawatts and gigawatts of power that's going to be required from nuclear, and so it's just one of many industries that we can supply, but it's a big looming one that we're intrinsically important to, especially during a reindustrialization phase and looking at more domestic capability. So, what's quite nice for all of us is that over the next few months, you're going to see a lot of progress in construction, and that's always very reassuring. But the good part is that all the big stuff was done last year in terms of like mine ramp installations. Now you're going to see the finalization of the project over the next few months. So obviously we need to install a secondary ventilation system so that we can formally mine. But the leases are paid, the mining permits are up to date, the bonds are all in place. So effectively, we can start mining any day now. All it is just a infrastructure installation process. And so later this year, we'll start trucking that ore. Well, before that, we'll start stockpiling the ore at surface, and stand by for seeing some press releases when we start bringing that stuff to surface. And later this year, we'll start trucking that into Delta, where we will start actually processing that to create that first initial product that will ship along our own rail spur. And the rail spur we're readying at the moment too. Leases are all paid up on that, and now all we got to do is install a loading system at our rail spur, so we can just start putting that onto the rail line, so Union Pacific can pick that up and deliver it around the country. And next year as well, once all this is going on, we'll finish the completion of the flotation plant, and at that point we can start producing acid spar. And so that's the high grade fluorspar that's used in the manufacture of aluminum, hydrofluoric acid, fluorine, uranium hexafluoride, electronics, all those kind of areas. These are 2/3 of the fluorspar market. And so at that point, we should be dealing with some very big chemical companies on that front. And then directly after that, we'll adapt the plant so we can produce that gallium concentrate that will then ship off to a refinery. But that should be a big cash boost to the company as well coming in next year, once we do finalize the methodology for separating out that gallium to create that concentrate ready for the refinery. And at that point we should be in a very strong position. Again, technically we are a fluorspar mine, but it becomes a gallium mine. And as we're already permitted, we become the only permitted gallium mine in the country as well. So it's, as I say, very fortunate circumstance. So we've got obviously a really wonderful team. I couldn't really be, they deserve a lot of generosity here. Some people that have been added to this roster is Roy Durr, who's been doing the mining for us. and obviously we're integrating them more closely with ARES at the moment, and it's become a much closer partnership than a contractor role. They really are really sort of being integrated into ARES at the moment. But there's many fluorspar experts in our company. Raul, who's on our board of directors, he served with Minersa in Spain, Europe's largest fluorspar producer, and it's very rare to get a geologist who has a fluorspar background, and that was very serendipitous that he had that experience. And through our network, we brought in Bob Lee, who's also a director, who runs fluorspar mines in Thailand, and was also very instrumental in helping us with our plant design, because one of the unfortunate components of trying to do something individually and for the first time essentially is that the expertise does not exist for things like plant design. But Bob had designed plants, he knew exactly how to do that for fluorspar, so we were able to come in and do what it was a bit of a struggle to do in the States, was build a plant specific to fluorspar that could recover as much as possible and get to the grades we wanted and achieve the specifications that the customer wanted. So, you know, everyone here has fed very hugely into where we've got to today. So hopefully that was a good summary of the industry, where the project is currently at, and what we can expect in the next few months. So I can turn it over to a few questions now.
That's great. James, let me just jump in there, just give you a few seconds before we fire the questions that you've had from investors. So thank you to everybody for your engagement this afternoon. Ladies and gentlemen, please do continue just to submit your questions, and I'm sure we'll get through to those in due course. Carl, as you can see, there's a number of questions from investors. If I may just hand back to you just to read through those questions, and then I'll pick up from you at the end.
Wonderful. James, thank you very much. We all appreciate that overview of things. We have a lot of questions to get through. Unfortunately, we're not going to be able to get all of them, so I'm going to try and summarize and combine as many of them as I can. James, some of these are going to be a bit repetitive from some of the things that you may have talked about, but maybe you can take this time to maybe give us a little bit more detail. And I do appreciate some of these you'll not be able to give definite times and dates as much as we would like, but please, as best as you can, we appreciate your candor. So the first question we received is, you touched on this a little bit, but it's talking about the shaft and the secondary ventilation system, kind of with an eye to when we can, because it's something that's held the company back for a little while, but when can we hope to see that completed, and really what's involved in that process?
Yeah, no, this is a good question, because I mentioned it was a bit of a prohibition on stopping us from actually formally mining, even when we had the mining permit and the bond in place. And the reason for that is that to be MSHOR compliant, who are the regulators of mines, you usually have a secondary exit way, essentially a escape shaft, and a second method of delivering air to the crew. But what was necessary, even though last year we got the ramp down to the level of the ore body, we needed to drift through that ore body to have that on the other side of the ore body. Because if we drill and blast from the top, then we still need that excavated portion below the pipe, so that the material can fall into that space and then be removed. Which means that the only possible place the second exit would be on the other side of the ore body. So the guys they're drilling right into the ore body at the moment, so they're drifting through it right now. So that's why I said we can start expecting to see soon fluorspar being stacked at surface, because that drift will produce that fluorspar to go there. Now the nice thing here is that once that drift is completed through, the shaft that is necessary to install that secondary ventilation system has actually already been done. We've taken advantage of a historic manhole that was used for pipe examinations, and we can run the ventilation system up that shaft. So the nice part is that once that drift is completed, the ventilation system installation becomes an incredibly fast process. So it is very necessary to mine, even though we are removing that ore from the ore body. It is technically part of the mine installation work rather than mining. But the formal drill and blast to remove that stuff will come directly after the installation of that secondary ventilation system. So when investors have reached out in the past and they've asked, what stops you actually mining now? It was that ventilation system and that drift through the ore body. But the good part is that drift has already started and that ventilation system is mostly built. So that should give you an approximate idea. It'll certainly be done later this year, that installation of that secondary ventilation system and escape portal.
Excellent. I guess that kind of moves the company to the next stage and logistics. So what's involved in the logistics of the company? I know we've been buying some machinery, but that transition from going from being a mining company to a production company, what would be involved in the logistics side of that, and what have you already got in place, and what still needs to be done to manage that portion of the business?
So the good part here is that, well, first of all, we're not a logistics company, and once you start speaking to buyers and people who are involved, like material brokers, in what's involved in the management of the shipment, it's actually a very complicated system. But the nice part is that we don't have to be involved in that. So say, for instance, we just need to sell at site, and the ownership gets taken over as soon as it gets loaded onto the rail car. So all we have to be responsible for is the maintenance of that rail spur and the loading. But once it goes on to loading, effectively at that point, we've already verified the specification of that material, the customer's accepted it, and so effectively it stops becoming our product at that point and becomes the customer's product, and the payment is authorized to go ahead at that point. And then the delivery of that material and the logistics around that become the responsibility of the buyer. There's a lot of companies all around the States. I mean, from Texas right over to like the northeast part of the US that want this stuff, including like big steel mills, like in Ohio and all those sort of places. That will fortunately get managed for us, and it's a cost we don't need to bear as part of our selling price. There's the market price. We'll sell for that. We'll load it for you onto the rail spur, and then the customer takes ownership of it as soon as it gets loaded. So we've maybe in the future we'll build a rail spur a bit closer to the manufacturing operation in Delta, but we have a rail spur that Union Pacific leased to us up in Lindell, just a bit north of that. So there will be just a trucking operation. It's only a few miles from the Delta facility all the way up to the Lindell rail spur, and then it'll be loaded on there, and then obviously that's our responsibility over with. So.
What about that step from the Lost Sheep mine to the Delta facility? Is there much involved in that?
So, I mean, like every mine, no mine is ever in a nice place. I mean, and when I say nice, I really mean it's never near anything. And the Spore Mountain is actually in a very fortunate position in that because it's got that whole area has incredibly unique geology. The only beryllium mine in the country sits just next to us, the Materion mine. But because beryllium is used in a lot of defense applications, the government has built this massive highway that goes all the way up to the mine site. So the infrastructure is already installed that allows us to transport material directly from the Spore Mountain all the way to site. It's just a big highway that's essentially going to be allocated to just us and the Materion operation. So it's that is typically one thing that gives everyone a lot of hassle, because transporting hundreds, thousands of tons of material is difficult if you don't have a road system, and that can be cause incredible time delays. So the big infrastructure works are done for us. We just need to truck it. Unfortunately, for the trucking component, that's not a difficult part. Essentially, the work that we're doing with Provo at the moment with mining, it would just be an extension of that work. So as they pull that ore out, it'll be stockpiled, it'll be sorted, and then it'll be packaged off so it can just go on a delivery vehicle that just takes it into Delta and then just gets dumped at the site and ready for processing. So that we've already have people in place to do all of that driving. We have the trucks, we have the personnel, and we've got the strategy to deliver all of that. So yeah, the nice part, as I said, like the big heavy lifting got done last year. Now it's just piecing all the small parts together.
Excellent. Thanks for that explanation. It's really good to understand that. And then moving to the lumps plant and further the flotation. I know you did touch on this a little bit, but maybe you could give us an idea of what still needs to be done and kind of the time that you have in mind, so that for each portion of that to be completed.
So with the lumps plant, we received that one first before the flotation plant, which was delivered last year. So the lumps plant, we were able to assemble the main components of it, and we poured the foundations for the main part of the plant, as well as erect the steel structure that would support the lumps plant. There is some additional concrete pouring that needs to be done just for a few other smaller bases of the other pieces of equipment. But the idea now with the lumps plant is that it sort of has an expedited route to get towards finalization and production, which is really just sort of assembling it a bit like a Lego set. So it looks very feasible that we can complete that this year and then just start putting that material that will be ready and delivered to the site through the lumps plant so we can start producing that metallurgical lump. That gives us our first revenue. That stops us from being a junior mining company, makes us a manufacturing company. And while that's all going on, the flotation plant, again, we'll need to pour concrete foundations and we'll erect the steel for that. But the good part is we've got all that stuff at site now. We've got all the steel foundations and structure. We've got all the flotation plant components, and we're going to be building that out at the same time the lumps plant is being constructed. It'll just take a little bit longer because we received it later, and it just needs a bit more of assembly, and it's a bit more of a fine process than the lumps plant, which is sort of a heavy-handed way of just getting to a high-grade metallurgical product that can then just go to the steel markets. But the nice part is, because there is that little bit of extra time that's going to be taken to construct that flotation plant, we can complete the gallium investigations just so we can adapt that appropriately, so we can create that siphoned off gallium concentrate. Now, I don't want to get ahead and promise too much, but obviously we need to ensure that it can be economically extrapolated. But assuming it can be, that gallium concentrate will go ahead and we'll produce that alongside the high-grade fluorspar that'll be intended, I imagine, predominantly for the chemical industry, who eats up the most of the acid spar that gets produced in the world. So.
Yeah, fantastic. And I'm just thinking, when we kind of get past that and we're into production, is there any way, and I'm sure this is in your models, of looking forward into what kind of production we're going to see in those in fluorspar and acid spar in 25 this year and 26? Do we have any projections on that?
I mean, I would say what we've done in the past is when we brought in independent mining engineers just to do an assessment of the property, they capped the production around about 50,000 tons a year, and they did that not because of the plant capacity or the amount of fluorspar available at this mining site. They did that just because of the fact that the type of mining that we're doing, the ramp installation with the drill and blast and excavation, they sort of saw a bottleneck of about 50,000 tons of final product coming from an operation of that type. So if we were to take that 50,000 tons and we sort of, let's say a few months of the year, towards the end of the year, we're producing some metallurgical grade, maybe it would be 10% of that, so a few thousand tons. I think a few thousand tons later this year is incredibly doable, just given the fact we should be removing some more soon, and the lumps plant should not take too long to construct unless we get some obstacles that come at us through construction delays or backlog on orders for things like concrete. But certainly I think, yeah, it's completely doable. A few thousand tons to 10,000 tons in that kind of range of producing metallurgical grade this year is certainly what we'd be aiming for. But once we've ramped that whole operation up and we've optimized it, really 50,000 tons on an annual basis is very easy for us to do. But the idea in the long run will actually be to now start doing some additional drilling on the secondary and tertiary mine site that we've identified. So that we know of where we want to mine next, and that'll eliminate that 50% that 50,000 ton bottleneck. So there's no reason why we couldn't double or triple production over the coming years. But I think it's just prudent to to get everything in place, and then ramp up gradually, and stick to conservative estimations around that 50,000 tons, just so we don't overpromise. I think it would be best at this point to just underpromise a little bit and then surprise everyone. But it's certainly very doable to install a secondary ramp installation. And what I would really like, towards the northeast part of the property, the ore body drifts towards the surface. So you could even have an expanded surface operation in that sort of area, provided the drilling just bears that out. And if you do that, then you could increase the capacity of the operation quite substantially. And the nice part here is that it gives us years of like blue sky potential. We just need to make sure that these initial tentative steps in from junior mining into production are just carefully managed. Margins can be maintained. We're just careful. We keep our costs down, and we build up very gradually. And then we should be in a very comfortable position to expand quite rapidly. So, yeah, I'm not trying to convolute the answer, but 50,000 tons is what we were projected to produce. That can certainly be increased over time as well. And obviously, the revenues that we projected, they don't really account for any sort of increase in revenue that might be generated from the gallium component of the operation either. So.
Perfect. I'll give you a nice softball for this one. Can production continue throughout the year?
Yes. So, I mean, originally, actually, we were not planning to do it, because the ground can sometimes get very cold at a mine site. But the nice part is, if you are actually underground, you're not subject to surface conditions. And obviously, the condition of an underground mine does not change, no matter if it's hot or cold or whatever. In fact, if anything, it might make it a bit more pleasant on the guys down in the shaft, because it gets very hot down there. So the ore body itself, the fact that we're going underground for that initial mining, means we can just keep pulling out ore. Now, we could probably pull out ore a little bit. The plant can produce final product faster than we can probably supply it. So it might not be necessary to do mining all year round, just because. To actually run the plant all year round, because it could very likely just process everything it could within the sort of annual production of fluorspar in fewer months. So say 12 months of mining, you might only need like 6-7 months of processing to do that whole batch. So I would say there's going to be year-round operations, but it might not always be necessary to have each component of the operation functional. If, for instance, we just need a bit more time to start stockpiling, we can, and it's more economic just to ramp the production of the plant down a little bit. We can just keep stockpiling and then just turn the plant back on when weather conditions are a bit nicer, and we can just run a whole load of material straight through to produce, a quick turnaround of 5, 10, 15, 20,000 tons, whatever it is that we've stockpiled ready for it. So, but yes, ultimately it will be a year-round operation. There'll always be somebody working there. There'll always be some level of activity there.
Thanks for that detail, James. I was just expecting a yes, but we appreciate the
depth
that you
yeah.
Kind of moving along to kind of a different topic. Thinking about the offtakes, thinking about Kramer and some of the other relationships that you've been developing. When it comes to selling the product, what do we have a clearer picture of what that's going to look like? Or, with all of the different governmental things that have been going on and the legislation that's being passed, the complete shift in mentality, has that changed the way the company has planned to sell its product?
So, yes and no. I would say provisionally at the moment, the plan is that the US steel industry will probably eat up almost all of our initial production. The reason why I say it might have changed a little bit is that the current administration is very focused on doing things like building back the national stockpiles of minerals. So, just a bit of a history thing, but Bill Clinton, under his administration, they had all these national stockpiles of minerals, and he sold them off for pennies on the dollar. But that effectively left the US without sufficient stockpiles of certain minerals. Now that the Trump administration is in and they are looking at replenishing those stockpiles, for certain things like fluorspar, we're obviously very well positioned. Now, if the government or the Department of Defense said we would like X amount of product and we will pay you Y, obviously we will try and ramp up our operations commensurate to try and meet that demand. So I would say that the customer base has not changed. The partners that we've been talking with have not changed, but there might be this additional government element to it where we might need to be involved in the build back of that national stockpile. It's not a guarantee. It looks like it is on the horizon as something we might need to be involved with in the future. And certainly on things like gallium, if we do go ahead with that project and it does look like some of the concentrations that the ARES National Laboratory identified were accurate and we can produce that concentrate, then there almost certainly would be defense-related work that we would have to do to ensure that there was a suitable supply going towards national, not national defense so much, but sort of, strength in depth, making sure supply chains were sufficient to ensure the US could manufacture what it needs to manufacture.
Sounds exciting. And given the kind of tariff situation that's kind of around, do we see that enabling the company to get premium pricing on its product compared to the world market?
I mean, I think we're still, this tariff discussion that's been going on at the moment, I mean, it still might be a bit early to say what's really going to happen with a lot of it. Some of it might be posturing to get better trade deals. I think some of it might be that. There are some countries that don't want to play ball, and they will incur tariffs if they don't want to play ball on that. I mean, it's very difficult to compete with the US as an industrial power. And so you're sort of picking a fight that you can't win if you're going to go down that route. But some countries will do that just out of stupidity. Now, obviously, with things like fluorspar, sometimes when it's so critical, the US will make exceptions for certain minerals that it just desperately needs. But if they've got a domestic producer in the country, they're not going to make those allowances for those and those exceptions for those companies and those minerals. So then those tariffs do get applied to those minerals. And in this case, I imagine fluorspar, they would make exceptions for it because they desperately need it. If we're producing it, they're not going to make that exception. And so then that's going to spike the price of fluorspar domestically, which will obviously benefit us because the supply has been massively increased in cost. Whatever it is, 25, 30%, whatever it is. Obviously, we're going to be economically benefiting from that. Financially benefiting from those tariffs. There's only one way it can really go for us, which is positive, which is nice to say, because there is a level of tariffs that do deal with domestic protectionism. That's good for us, and the increase of costs of international suppliers, and that's good for us too, because it enables us to we can still raise our prices and come under what they're able to sell for. So there's no bad scenario for us on the tariff front.
Excellent. And then just thinking about the overall cost, do you believe the company will reach out for any more funding moving forward, or are we feeling pretty comfortable at the moment?
I mean, what I would say is that we have enough. I mean, the project has now got easily enough money to get itself into production and start producing. There could be, I don't know, if there's anything outside project costs that we could look to raise to increase the strength of the company, its profitability, to support anything outside of the project. Maybe we would look at that. But I mean, at this point, we're in probably the most comfortable position we've been in for years. I mean, the project is essentially de-risked at this point. Anything we would raise additionally at this point would just to be support the company outside of that project. That's all I would say about that. But we fortunately, because we have the institutional investor that supports us, things like basic G&A costs on a monthly basis. I mean, they very much facilitate our ability to meet those costs. There are certain, certainly some of the finances the company has had to raise in the past to support itself. It would definitely be better to raise money to take out more expensive money with cheaper money. But these are, I think, more fine-tuned decisions that we need to examine We don't want to dilute very heavily. We don't want to make any poor decisions late in the game here, especially as that once the revenue is online, we're essentially we have that non-dilutive, non-debt income coming into the company, which is very different to anything we've ever had before. So there's a bit of a nuanced examination, I think, that would need to be taken ahead of raising of any funds additional to what we've currently got. So.
Yeah, you mentioned briefly there about Sorby. There's been quite a few questions about the agreement that ARES has with Sorby. Maybe you could take a few moments and just explain how that is structured and what it looks like.
Well, I'm not a banker, so I'm probably going to get this a little bit wrong, but it's essentially that the institutional investor took a long-term hedge on the success of the company. So they bought shares in ARES, but we made for an arrangement where the money for that purchase would be apportioned to us on a monthly basis over a couple of years, with the provision that we expected to get into production and start, and the share price would increase. And the benefit to us and Sorby is that as we get closer and the share price will appreciate, the returns we get increase as well. So effectively, it's free money exactly, but when I think the recent release, we talked about getting a non-dilutive capital injection into the company, which didn't cost us any shares or anything like that. That was because of the appreciation in volume, stock price, and because we took that bet, now that institutional investor pays us out that capital money based on our performance, and we expect that to get even better. We strategically made that investment at a time when we knew we were about to go into production and we were close to revenue, understanding that that would massively boost the company, and then it would boost the revenues to the company as well. So if you can sort of understand that sort of structure, I'm sure a banker would do a much better job of explaining it. But essentially, we incrementally benefit on a monthly basis from performing well, and that's why we've been doing well with Sorby recently. Is we've been performing very well. So.
That's great, and good to have those relationships in place. And thinking of that, we talked a little bit about this in the past. You even touched on it, but your relationship with Kramer. Now, there was talk of a $2 million funding from Kramer at one point. Where do things stand with Kramer, and did ARES ever receive that financing?
Yeah, so those guys are really great. They're still standing by waiting. So when you do an offtake agreement like this, there is that forward sale component that goes into this. Now, in order to qualify, you can't take your ore and just send it to the customer. They need to see final spec. But once they see final spec, then a materials broker like Kramer says, wonderful, payment goes out. But you can't take your ore and also just send it to a third party like SGS or say Bob Lee's plant in Thailand and have it processed there and then sent on. It's got to be ore from your ore body that goes into the plant at your site that meets the spec, and then once it meets that spec, then you qualify with the customer. So as we get closer to the lumps plant being erected, all we've got to do is get that initial screens up and running, process it through that, demonstrate that spec, and then obviously we qualify for the forward investment that would be coming from them. But obviously we're still very much in contact with them. We've been keeping them updated. They really want to move ahead with this. They're obviously constrained by the way the industry has to work with regard qualification of material for customers. You can understand why they've got to make that verification before they can guarantee supply. But like the good part is that they're waiting for us here. There's big demand here. There's a big enthusiasm for an American producer. So that would be a nice capital injection into the company that would be non-dilutive, non-debt. That would obviously be very beneficial just for the streamlining of operations, if not expedited operational capabilities of the company. So.
Great. Now, James, we're running really low on time, but we have a lot of questions. So unfortunately, we're not going to be able to answer all of them, but maybe we could do a couple quick rapid fire kind of question style. I know they're complicated topics, but maybe just to cover as much as we can in the last few minutes. Okay. Yeah. So your relationship with ARES and with Nano, now that the mine is going into production, there's a lot more required of you. Are you still going to be able to manage both of those relationships comfortably?
I mean, the nice part here is that I don't know what I can talk about, but like earlier on, I mentioned the fact that the Department of Energy had made ARES part of its winning contract for that $3.4 billion pool. But the reason why it won that is that the nano element of that relationship was going to be providing things like the enrichment, the conversion, and the uranium mining. And so there's a big synergy between the two companies that we're trying to work out how they can be a greater partner. Because the nice part for ARES here is that even when it was struggling for cash, there was that ability for it to be supported by funds that were coming in from another place. And I can't say where that was coming in from, but ARES could be supported to survive. But because of that relationship there, ARES gets additional support from a much larger, more powerful institution company that has access to many more funds. And the fact that now ARES is allied on a project for the Department of Energy with Nano means that there will be additional funds that come in as the relevant task orders come out. So there's been one main task order that's come out so far. We're expecting the second task order out in August, but then they should be much more rapid fire after that. There's only one fluorspar producer in the country, which will be us. So there will be additional benefits of that partnership. Will be very financially beneficial, and I mean grant money too, not loans and not equity placements or anything like that. Just grants that come ARES' way just through that relationship, because the US needs a lot of power, a huge amount of power. Like if we were speaking to Bloomberg the other day, and they were projecting something like 300 gigawatts of power, something crazy like that. But most of it they expected to get from the increase in nuclear. And the reason for that is because if you were to outlay that much more power in the country, you would need massive infrastructure upgrades to the grid. And that would take billions and billions of dollars and years to do. But nuclear, the advanced nuclear, does not need that. That can be put anywhere, it can co-locate. So they expect that reindustrialization, electrification of the country, and the powering of those data centers to come from nuclear. That means a lot of uranium hexafluoride. And that basically puts ARES in a nice strategy. So the two are related parties. They are servicing the same end customer, which is effectively, it's going to be largely the tech industry. But in order for ARES to be involved in that relationship is intrinsically important.
Yeah, thanks, James. I think we probably could spend an hour just up on that topic on its own.
Yeah.
This is the final question because the rapid fire required too much detail. This is a personal one. So it was asked, how are you doing with your new family? And they hope that you're taking the time and having a balanced life and enjoying your young children.
I don't know, man. What I would say is my wife would not say I lead a very balanced life at all. I mean, there's 3 small children. 2 of them have just got, like, they're 4, 2, and 7 months. But like I'm away so much, I think I'm probably not doing a very poor job on the father front. I try and get home as much as I can, but like I work all the time. So like I see them in evenings, maybe for like half an hour before they go to bed, and then I try and work as little as I can on Saturday. But then that means I've got to work most of Sunday, half of Sunday, so I can have Sunday evening free. So I don't know. But it's the nice part is that like if we build now, then the future will be sort of freed up. So maybe the kids will forgive me when I'm a bit, when they're a bit older, and I can, come back at a normal time. But unfortunately, they have to be 12-hour days. There's just too much to do, and that effectively means you leave in the dark and get back in the dark. So, yeah, I'm doing my best.
Carl, James, Thank you very much indeed for your time. And James, the problems only get bigger when they get older. So you got that. Well, look, James, thank you for your time. Carl, thank you for posing those questions, and thank you to everybody for your engagement. And as the guy said, we will make all the questions available. If there's any topics extra, we can always hit you back up post today's meeting. James, I know investor feedback is important to you. I will certainly redirect those on the call to give you their thoughts and expectations. But before doing so, if I may, just a couple of closing comments, and then I'll send investors to give you their feedback.
Oh, well, I think nothing more than what we've touched on today. Like, we're in a really wonderful position now, and things are going along so smoothly at the project site that, like, I couldn't be happy with the way things are going. There's a lot of construction going on. There's a lot of mining. I'll do my best to get more public releases out. Sometimes you can just get wrapped up in the project enough that you're not getting the updates out fast enough. So I know I get criticized for that. I will do better. But the nice part is that there should be some really positive ones coming out, and with everything on the horizon, there should be a lot of positive updates coming out over the next few months to the next year, especially as everything starts coming online and we start seeing these things getting erected and built. But there's a lot of support for us at the moment. It's a wonderful time to be in this situation, just given the geopolitical circumstances. So I don't want to waffle on too much, but yeah, just generally, I want to send a message that it's a very positive position to be in, and like it's one of the happiest I've been with the position of the company in recent times.
That's great, James. Thank you once again for updating investors. If I could please ask investors not to close this session, as I now automatically redirect you so you can provide your feedback in order the company can better understand your views and expectations. On behalf of the company, I'd like to thank you for attending today's presentation and enjoy the rest of your day or evening. Thank you once again.